So we've just looked at what homelessness actually means within the law. We're now going to look at the second of that five-part test, which is eligibility. And I've been doing this job, doing my job of kind of supporting people to access assistance under the Housing Act for 6 or 7 years now. And I've still never had to actually get my head fully around eligibility law. So I'm not in any way an expert on it. However, what I can tell you is some ways in which you don't need to be an expert in order to get people the help they're eligible for. So, broadly speaking, eligibility is not far off the same thing as having recourse to public funds. It's not quite the same thing. But basically, there are three groups of people who are not eligible for assistance. So, firstly, there are people who are subject to immigration control. So they're basically dealt with under immigration law, which is something I know next to nothing about. The next group are people, potentially British citizens, who don't pass the habitual residency test. And so they would be, for example, people who've been living in Spain for the last 20 years, they're returning home to England. They would need to pass the habitual residency test before they could access homelessness assistance under the Housing Act. One thing to say about that, though, one of the kind of myths out there that we've seen once or twice is that councils tell people, you need to have lived in the country for 6 months before you pass the HRT, the habitual residency test. The Code of Guidance, the final section of the Code of Guidance, the Homelessness Code of Guidance, is an annex about the habitual residency test, and that specifies that someone could pass the HRT after as little as a month. It's more about has that person sold their home in Spain? Have they brought all their belongings back to England? Is there evidence that they are genuinely setting up home in England, or have they got all that stuff still back in Spain? And is there a suspicion that maybe they're going to return back for some reason in the near future? So that's kind of people who don't pass the habitual residency test. And then you've got kind of this group of people who is particularly going to be relevant to EU nationals. I'm making these videos in May 2021. We're in this kind of transition period in terms of homelessness law following Brexit. And if I'm honest, I don't really understand where things are at. But again, you don't need to understand where things are at to help people out, and that's kind of what the message of this is. So basically, if you're working with someone, let's say you work with an East European national, so just to give a bit of context, for many years now, the official rough sleeper estimate statistics have shown that there are a large number of people sleeping rough who are from East European countries. So, for example, Polish people. So if you work with, for sake of example, work with a Polish person, you think they're homeless, you say to them, look, there's absolutely nothing at all to lose from approaching the local authority and seeing what comes back. So, you trigger the application, via email if you can. Really try to do it via email. So you've got a written record of what happens. At that point, the council's got reason to believe that they might be homeless and might be, they might be homeless and they want help. It's their job then to look into whether that person might be eligible for assistance. And it's a low threshold. So if there's any doubt, until that doubt's been eliminated, they might be eligible for temporary accommodation if they also might be in priority need. But basically, if you make the council follow the legal process, which is a strange thing to say because council should follow the legal process without you making them do it. But if the council follows the legal process, they should issue what's called a Section 184 notification, which is basically where they make a decision about whether that person's eligible. And they have to give that decision in writing, and it needs to explain why they've reached that decision. You can then take that written decision to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, so a solicitor or something, kind of wave it in their face and say, look, does this look right to you? Kind of say, this is the person's situation, this is what the council said, does that look right? And in some cases, many cases, they'll say, yeah, that looks right. So in one sense, there are people who do not benefit from housing law, because they're not eligible for assistance, and it becomes very difficult. It's genuinely difficult to support people who are in that situation who cannot. Often that means they won't be able to get housing benefit, so they're kind of stuck in this situation of often rough sleeping, or other kind of really kind of kind of really kind of difficult living circumstance, let's say, that, kind of like slum landlord kind of thing, that kind of thing that's just not good. Often, subject to modern slavery or risk of being kind of exploited in that way. So that's kind of, in one sense, that's the end of eligibility. There's one thing that would be, useful, one kind of exemption which it's not that uncommon to come across. And again, this is not something I'm an expert on, but I can tell you where you can find good information from. And that is basically where you're working with someone who's on a spousal visa, so their husband or wife is a British citizen, they're in the country on this spousal visa, and they are subject to domestic abuse from that British spouse. In that situation, there is it's called a DDV, a destitute domestic violence exemption, I think. I don't even know that much. But what I can tell you for sure is that if you're working with someone in that situation, you can support them. You can make a dash, do a dash form, which goes to the local multi-agency risk assessment conference around domestic abuse. And they're experts at this stuff because they do that stuff all the time. So they will be able to tell you, does this person, is this person likely to be eligible for a DDV concession? And they can often do that kind of legwork. So if nothing else, even unless you're absolutely positively sure that someone is not eligible for assistance, and if you don't understand the law very well, you probably won't be positively sure about it. You should be assisting those people to make homeless applications anyway, and making sure councils follow the process and issue that written decision, which you can then analyse. There's a little bit more to say about this because you will sometimes work with people who are not eligible for assistance under housing law, but may have very considerable care and support needs, and therefore may well be eligible for housing under the Care Act in effect. You wouldn't be called, it'd be called like respite or something. But basically, where you've got someone with, it has to be quite high kind of categories, care and support needs. But in theory, you could still access assistance under the Care Act, which, because for reasons I don't understand, kind of social care is not considered to be a public fund that you could have recourse to or not. Effectively, they owe a due to anyone in their area, whether they have recourse to public funds or not. So hopefully that's helpful. As I say, if nothing else, just understand that you can get a lot of people housed without understanding the law very well. If you follow these general principles of making sure councils accept applications when they should accept applications, make sure they issue those written decisions, because by then it's in kind of slow motion and you can research it. So if you've got a particular situation, you get that Section 184 notification, you can then get on Google and you can find out whether that looks right, or you can get down to a housing solicitor or something, again, who can tell you whether it looks right or not. So you can still get people with the help that they may be eligible for by always triggering that application. So that's what I'm going to say about this. Next up is priority needs, which is the complicated bit. Again, say it every time, do check us out on Facebook. Do check out our website, justus.org.uk, because we've got a training tab. If you kind of click down it, you'll get the dates of all our upcoming training. We do, what I would call a really good introduction to homelessness law course, where we talk more about, more detail about this kind of stuff. Which is accessible to anyone. We get a lot of people who are just members of the public, they're just interested in it. So it's not just professionals who come on that. And I would say it's pretty reasonably priced. It's 30 quid if you're attending in your own time. It's £50 if you're coming from a professional organisation. But yeah, we do, as I say, we get really good feedback, and often people come to that first day course and then they'll come to subsequent courses afterwards because they found it very helpful. So yeah, do check that out as well.